amateur historian of sorts, always have been, especially 20th century history, and especially the history of the run-up to and actual fighting of the Second World War. That's always been an interest of mine. And part of that was something that the French constructed called the Maginot Line. Now, this grew out of the First World War and the French's experiences in the First World War. And so they, with a World War I mindset still entrenched between their ears, they believed that by building a series of concrete fortifications along the French border with Germany, and also covering the French border with Belgium as well, that a repeat of what happened in the early stages of World War I, where the Germans, under the Schlieffen Plan, invaded France through Belgium, could not happen again. That was the idea. So they built the Maginot Line, is what it was called. Well, what ultimately happened is that the Germans, with their panzer armies, panzer brigades of tanks, Heinz Guderian, Erwin Rommel, mobile warfare tank armies that go around fortifications, surround, bypass and surround enemy military formations. Well, that's what they did. They took their panzer armies through the Ardennes forest in Luxembourg, bypassed the Maginot Line, invaded France, and conquered France in the space of less than a month. I mean, the Maginot Line was obsolete before it was even constructed, because, as an old saying goes, generals are always fighting the last war. So the Maginot Line was a waste of time. It was a failure. It was a white elephant. It was an immense, for the size of the French economy, especially during the Great Depression, an immense investment of time and manpower and resources that ultimately failed completely and miserably. I think about the Maginot Line and always, that's the first thing it reminded me of when Donald Trump started talking about his building a wall along the border with Mexico. I'm going to build a wall, and it's going to have a moat, and it's going to have fortifications and emplacements and battlements, and it's the kind of thing that appeals to people who don't think, who don't probe beneath the surface, who don't actually stop and think, okay, how does this really work in practice? Would this really work in practice? Now, conceptually, controlling the border, we all support that. We need to control the border. The borders are an expression of national sovereignty. If we just throw open our borders, act like our borders don't exist, then we're not really a nation, are we? Well, there's another term for that sort of thing, a failed state. So yes, we need to control our borders, but would a wall along the entire border with Mexico do the job? Well, the Maginot Line didn't work either. But there's more to it than that. I mean, fortifications, a wall, that's the beginning of the process. It's not the be-all and end-all of it. I mean, remember back before former Texas Governor Rick Perry lost his mind and became a Trumplican, when he pointed out last summer that he ridiculed Donald Trump's call for a wall because for the same reasons that I just gave. There's so much more to it than that. A wall is part of it, is part of the process, but there are so many other aspects to it. Surveillance, air power, observation, electronic sensors. Just a wall. You can climb over a wall or dig underneath a wall or just go around it on the coasts. I mean, A wall by itself is not the solution. And that's all Trump talks about. I'm going to build a wall. Well, okay, fine. But what about the rest of it? He never talks about that. This is why I have absolute contempt for Trump supporters. Because they don't get it and they don't seem to give a damn. They're not interested in solutions. They're interested in having their ears tickled with the stupid demagoguery. They don't care about the facts, I mean, which makes Trump's selection of Mike Pence as his running mate all the more hilarious because, of course, nobody would ever confuse Mike Pence with a border hawk. And reportedly, Trump didn't want. I'm going to be talking about this in another video, but reportedly, Trump didn't want Mike Pence, but then he was kind of forced into it. Well, oh, really? I thought nobody controlled Trump. And his supporters, the Ann Coulters, the Laura Ingrams, the Sean Hannitys, and all these other morons are now trying desperately to make excuses for it and try to say, well, Trump was forced to do it. Oh, I thought nobody controlled Trump. Well, that's another video. The point is, and now, as you would expect, Trump's fantasy wall is going to be in the GOP platform. Now, before I say anything else, understand Trump won the nomination, so he gets his stuff in the platform, even though his vice presidential selection doesn't believe a word of it. Although he'll pretend to. That's how these things work. Remember, people don't vote for the bottom of the ticket, they vote for the top of the ticket. And whoever the top of the ticket selects as a running mate is not indicative of anything, really. It's just pandering. Oh, that's reassuring. He selected Mike Pence. Well, no, that doesn't. I mean, it might be more so in this case because Donald Trump, as I said the other day, will continue to say, Donald Trump doesn't want to be president. He just wants to prove that he can win the presidency. And then after he was elected, he'll find a way to quit and bow out and he'll be on to the next scam. That's just the way Donald Trump works. So Mike Pence may have been the only way to the presidency for Mike Pence. That I'm sure that's probably his calculation. But at the present time, it's no surprise that the nominees' issue stances are going to be in the GOP platform. That's not really any real surprise. Now, Susan Wright at Red State didn't know how to feel about this newest development. But apparently the Republican Party is set to endorse Donald Trump's version of a border wall, the 21st century Maginot Line, by inserting it into the party platform at the upcoming Trumpvention. Unlike the swill Trump and his Trumpidian faithful have been spewing for the past year, securing the southern border is not a Trump invention. Many have come before and stressed the need to do something about the influx of illegal aliens. The real problem rests in the will or lack of Washington to keep the nation safe and to enforce existing immigration laws. On Monday, Kansas Secretary of State Chris Kobach and Amy Carnevale of Massachusetts petitioned to have the language of the draft platform changed to include the mention of the wall during subcommittee hearings. This goes to the delegates and listed security borders as high priority. This is why we support building a wall along our southern border and protect all borders of entry, or all ports of entry, The new language reads, according to Kobach, the border wall must cover the entirety of the southern border and must be sufficient to stop both vehicular and pedestrian traffic. Which no wall would be sufficient to stop, really. That was stronger and more in line with Trump's repeated calls for a wall than the version of the platform that was distributed to delegates as a jumping-off point Sunday night, which was obtained by Clinton News Network. That is why we have in the past demanded at our vulnerable borders construction of a physical barrier that at all ports of entry maximum vigilance, the earlier language said, close quote. Now here's the problem I have. And it's just a statement of reality. It's a statement of geography and topography. You're not going to build a wall along the entirety of the southern border. To further promote that fantasy is to clown the party into oblivion. I have to wonder if Kobach and Carnevale have ever visited the southern border. I know Trump stopped at an airport in Texas once, but never actually got close to the border. I mean, the idea that has been put forth by saner, more experienced heads, which used to include Rick Perry, is strategic fencing along with boots on the ground and aviation assets that are in constant contact with first responders. Obstacles, barriers, that's the beginning. That's not the end of the process. It's not the only means. You got to have a combination of things. People who've been doing this, like Rick Perry before he lost his mind and became a Trumplican, have point this out constantly. It's more complicated than just a damned wall. And topography itself makes it impossible to build a wall along the entire Mexican border. If the RNC moves forward with wording that is unrealistic and unattainable, and remember, Donald Trump has made this wall, this border fence, or border barrier, or whatever, he's made this border fence contingent upon Mexico paying for it. And he knows damn good and well that he's never going to be able to force Mexico to pay for this wall. Just as Mexico won't do it. They've already said as much. And if Mexico won't pay for it, then who's going to pay for it? It's not going to get done, is the bottom line. It's not going to get done. It's as simple as that. So if the RNC moves forward with wording that is unrealistic and unattainable, after having told Trumplicans for the past year, we're going to build a wall, Trump gets things done, win, strength, simply to feign some unity with the huckster at the top of the ticket, they will do more harm to the party than has already been inflicted, because when the wall doesn't, if Trump somehow got elected and the wall didn't materialize, then what? Now, of course, the Trumplicans would never blame their hero. They would blame the GOP establishment, because that's an endless scapegoat. The full platform committee met on Tuesday, and nobody there was familiar with the terrain and unique makeup of our nation's southern border, and nobody offered anything even the slightest bit more realistic than Trump's imaginary barrier. Now, you know who else pointed this out? And look, I'm no Jeb Bush fan, never was, never will be. And we all know that Jeb Bush is not just a border squish, he is an open borders, border erasure extremist. He endorsed Obamnesty, remember? Jeb Bush a year ago said that he would, if he was elected president, he would leave Obamnesty in place. Barack Obama's immigration proclamation. Amnesty by executive order. He said he'd leave it in place. So bear that in mind. This is part of where this comes from, but he's not wrong to call out the Trump fantasy train. Susan Wright continued at Red State. Former Florida Governor Jeb Bush came out to dash a bit of cold water on the GOP presumptive nominee's big plans. Here's a quote from Politico, speaking to MSNBC contributor Nicole Wallace, who served as his press secretary in Tallahassee, Florida. Bush called Trump, to his credit, very smart at exploiting these kind of opportunities. Well, he's a demagogue. That's what demagogues do. He's a master at understanding how the media works, more than anybody I've ever seen in politics. Kudos to him for creating the environment and then manipulating the environment to his effect, Bush said in the interview airing on Monday night. There will be no wall built, though, Bush told Wallace, and Mexico will not pay for it, nor will there be a ban on Muslims, which there should be. But again, you have to, remember the truth, remember reality. Anyway, this comes on the same day that an interview with former Texas Governor Rick Perry, the man who was sane, who knows more about border control and effective border security than anybody else in the country, but then threw that all overboard, turned off his brain, and committed treason and heresy and sacrilege and blasphemy by becoming a Trumplican. His interview was released on Monday, stating that the border wall as proposed by Trump couldn't happen. Well, I guess kudos to Governor Perry for not letting facts get in the way of his Trumplicanism. Perry has said he will support the presumptive nominee, however, so just that is a classic example of cognitive dissonance. Classic example of cognitive dissonance. How can you support the presumptive nominee and know for a fact that the linchpin of his platform is a fantasy and will never happen? Doesn't that seem to create a conflict? Anyway, this is what Governor Perry said. Quote, "This is all like an alternative universe that he created," Bush said of Trump. "The reality is that's not going to happen, and people are going to be deeply frustrated, and the divides will grow in our country." And, at some point, when does it become less the responsibility of the demagogues and con men who keep leading American voters astray and start becoming more the responsibility of the Americans who are led astray for not using their brains and not being, not swallowing the snake oil, not buying the sales pitch? Do not put your faith in princes, as the scriptures say. Don't trust in men, trust in God. I mean, we're supposed to be a nation of laws, not of men. Now we're a nation of men. That's why I say the old American Republic is gone. We're no longer a republic. Whatever we are, we're not a republic. The Constitution is dead. We're a nation of men, not of laws. Because if we were a nation of laws gets us right back to principle. Constitutional principle. That's why former constitutionalist Douglas V. Gibbs used to say the Constitution is dead center. Classical centrist. Well, what do you mean? Constitution is dead center. Well, not anymore. And not anymore for Mr. Gibbs either, since he's supporting Donald Trump. Finish the Bush quote, "And this extraordinary country, still the greatest." No, it's not. No, it's not the greatest country on the face of Earth anymore. We continue to stagger instead of soar, and that's the heartbreaking part of this. Is I think people are really going to feel betrayed. Well, many already do, Governor. But then, like I say, whose fault is that ultimately? It's like what Obi-Wan Kenobi said in Episode 4, A New Hope. Who's the fool? The fool or the one who follows him? Well, somehow both major political parties nominated candidates for president that the vast majority of the public can't stand. But there are large minorities in each party who love them. And so it's a question of, well, which candidate will the American electorate hate the least? And I think we know the answer to that question, and it's not going to make Trumplicans happy. Oh, by the way, did I mention you ain't going to get your wall either, but it's more complicated than that? But then you don't care about facts or anything else. What am I wasting my